It's been a while since I last made a video, and I appreciate folks being patient. We've just been very full with the things going on in our life, in the garden, and in the world in general. I wanted to come back to things with a walking tour of a space in the front through a particular lens, so stick with me. With our Edible Acres project as a nursery and as a small permaculture homestead, we value diversity and complexity, and we do so for a number of reasons. I think ethically and fundamentally it feels like the right thing to do, but then it also pans out that in the real world, diversity and complexity, interrelationship, and even density pans out to be incredibly living and full and resilient. We work with many hundreds of different varieties of plants, many of which are annual, but the vast majority are long-lived perennials with very complex histories and backgrounds. Some of them have been on this continent represented since the last ice age. Many of them have been recent arrivals coming to this region in the last 50 years or 100 years. Some are considered noxious invasives and illegal aliens, but all of them are welcome here, and they all have amazing attributes to contribute to our world, I believe. I think sometimes I look at a garden like this. Not all of our gardens are this crazy and packed, but I can feel pretty overwhelmed with what's happening in here. Like, for example, we've got these beautiful purple flowers of the lupin providing nitrogen, as well as all these sennas. These were cast in here last year, and they've come back for another round. Bronze fennel popping up through here, and anywhere there's even a single photon of light sneaking through that, arnica as a medicine is spreading and running and covering the ground. Even a sea kale is popping up in here. And I think it's pretty easy to get to a place where, and sometimes I feel this for a moment, where this is just too complex, there's just too much happening, we need to simplify, we need to get it down to one or two keystone plants. But the moment we do things like that, we start having losses. On the flip side, when we lean into this complexity and this diversity of characters, what we find is at the end of the season, we're left with more plants than we know what to do with. And these are plants that we can trust that when they're sent out to new locations, to new folks, or complex or degraded sites elsewhere, that they're going to be able to thrive with each other because they're adapted to the idea of complexity and diversity and density. When you can give it some time to really observe a system and see what all these different layers are doing and how these plants relate to each other, the sense that, or the narrative that we're told that plants compete with each other, sometimes they do compete, but more often than not, there's a really beautiful sense of mutualism that's happening. And we just came out of a pretty intense drought moment, and having all these plants packed so close together really protected the soil, which fundamentally is the foundation of all of this life in the first place. And so having this setup where there are all these different plants with all their different types of bodies, all their different backgrounds, all their different abilities and differing abilities, all their things that they can contribute to the system next to one another, they weathered that drought beautifully. We got some rain yesterday, and now everyone can come up together. And seeing as we go up in succession the complexity of, for example, here's some elderberry, and then we get up to the canopy in here. These are the trees that were here before we started, the maples, the pines, the tulip poplar. And it can be pretty easy to ascribe a higher value to these later succession or these overstory, the powerful trees, and they're wonderful trees. But we can't forget that in order for any of these trees to be here, there's a massive working class in the soil of the fungi, of the worms, all the nematodes and beetles and whatnot, all living down in the soil, creating the relationships in the soil, liberating nutrients, manufacturing goods so that those trees can be there. And the trees give back too, to some extent, for sure. But it's important to remember that working class, for sure. In some cases, we had particular ideas of what was going to happen, or hopes and dreams, I guess. In this area, these canes were all raspberries, and we had hoped that this whole area would become a raspberry patch that we could harvest as we drove by. That was the vision, and it was set in motion, and for 2 years it worked out that way. Then some sort of disease or issue came in that started to really affect the raspberries. Now, we could have fought that. We could have gotten into sprays or tried to figure something out, but the disease was moving through, and so we just allowed it to happen. And what's now revealing itself is that luckily, a few years ago, I threw some rotten pawpaws underneath in the fall, and I didn't even realize that they had germinated and started growing in the deep shade of the raspberries. And so rather than fighting what was coming down the line here as far as what was happening with succession, we let things evolve as they will. It feels like lemon balm will choose to move into that space. Perhaps we can facilitate what happens in there, but more likely than not, this will evolve into a pawpaw thicket. And so nature is deciding a bit who's next in here, and we're gonna go with that. In general, we find that if we give all of these different beautiful characters equal and fair access to healthy, clean water and good food in the form of rich, balanced soil, protection from harsh elements in the form of mulch and care, that they're all able to thrive in general and expand. And they support each other. The nitrogen fixers building the soil from down below, the more hungry plants like this yastaberry still providing value in the form of shade and cover and protection from erosion and rain. And in some ways they're able to absorb when there's excess, too much rain, too much nutrient. These are the folks that can grab that and then release it in the form of leaves later on. But all of these different characters in this space can relate to each other in positive ways, and they're all valuable. If you're exploring the concepts of permaculture or saying that what you are doing is permaculture, a key part of that is people care.